Evening all. Okay, I'm going to do another Tal session this evening. So Happy New Year to you all, and yeah, I thought we could continue looking at the Bled tournament in 1961. So Tal had won the World Championship in 1960, but was then defeated soon after, a year later, by Botvinnik in a return match. But he had learnt a lot strategically, I think, about chess. He had commented, you know, he was able to win games just purely strategically quite often after that. The problem, the main problem with Tal's play is really tied up with health. When Tal's kidneys weren't playing up, it could be anyone. In this Bled tournament, yeah, he was able to play in this tournament, and he did very well in it. And he was to play actually Fischer in one game with the black pieces, and I think we should look at this game first. I've covered it before on the YouTube channel, so let's just lightly go over it here as well. So Fischer playing white against Tal played, let's take Tal's perspective maybe. So Fischer playing white played e4, and Tal played the Sicilian defence. So at this time Fischer was really strong, of course, in 1961. In 1959 Tal destroyed Fischer in this other tournament, beating him 4 times, but 61 was different. So Fischer was quite significantly stronger by this stage. Knight f3 was played by Fischer, and it looks standard so far, knight c6. But in these times this wasn't an invitation for the Sveshnikov variation, this was just a way of getting a particular flavour of the Sicilian, and we're about to see with e6. Okay, now one problem with e6 fundamentally is often the dark squares are a little bit weaker than usual. And actually that's something in this game which is quite significant here, especially when black is not going to, you know, follow up with d6. If he's just playing for queen c7, sometimes the dark square complex can be an issue. So we see here knight c3, and now actually the move queen c7, which looks fine really. It's inviting maybe a tempo gainer which isn't that hostile at the moment. Maybe the queen could just go back here to b8 potentially, but this next move is quite tricky to meet. Fischer actually plays in this position the move g3. Okay, and this not only prepares potentially to feed to the bishop, but also, of course, the f4 square can be made use of for bishop f4 attacking that queen. So, okay, is this a big problem? Now, perhaps here it might be prudent for black to play the move a6 to stop a knight b5 move, because it could become significant if in a particular position. This could be dangerous tempo gainer available to white. But Tal playing slightly obliviously to the position as if it's a fairly normal position, plays actually knight f6. And I wonder if you feel that there's any major issue with this, or do you think it should be just minor issues with this move? If I gave you 20 seconds to have a look at this, do you think this is a problem here? Or not? To play the move knight f6. I was going to see if there's any interesting notes as well about this game. Technical notes. Okay. Alright, let's proceed. Well, basically the queen was kicked with knight db5. The queen goes to b8. And we see a slight issue now. Bishop f4 is used. So the queen's kind of run out of squares. Unless black wants to play, what can black play? He's basically forced to use the e5 square. So much pressure on d6 is now being exerted. So it looks as though he's fallen into something. Something quite bad here. Straight in the opening, just move 8. This looks slightly odd, this position. Okay, if black is forced to play something like e5, that's a major concession. That's weakening the d5 square. So Tal decides to play the move knight e5. For example, if e5, then simply white can actually just play bishop g5 and just try and exploit this d5 hole. It looks quite unpleasant. The queen is not particularly clever on b8 here, but there might even be stronger than this. So okay, so bishop f4, we see knight b5 being played, and here you might think a stereotypical move would be like bishop g2, or rather a routine move would be bishop g2 in this position. Okay, but actually something even stronger, it seems, was played by Fischer in this position, a non-routine move here. What would be the issue with bishop g2, you might wonder? Possibly, something like a6 would be useful with b5 to follow, or if a6 then the knight here, then bishop c5 could be useful. But Fischer actually plays a move which looks odd here. Bishop e2. He doesn't go to g2 here, he goes to e2. And he's covering up the f3 square here with bishop e2. Okay. And there's a particular intention here that he's not going to let black castle easily without playing a very interesting forcing sequence. And this forcing sequence actually revolves around the d6 square. Often this question about knight b5 being useful is often answerable, well, is d6 going to be useful without the knight getting kicked back somewhere awkwardly? But here, with bishop e2, the d6 square is technically being made use of, because we see now a seemingly energetic move from black okay, it looks aggressive. Bishop c5. Now, say white routinely castled. If white routinely castled, well, it looks weird without the fianchetto anyway. It's not the intention at all, really. But maybe even black can consider h5. No, Fischer's intention here is to make use of the d6 square, and he plays a forcing sequence here, which is very interesting, and it involves giving up the dark square bishop as well. So that's a kind of paradox. To give up the dark square bishop to exploit a dark square would seem a bit strange, perhaps, but that's what he did. He plays bishop takes e5. Okay, so queen takes e5, and the forcing sequence idea is unveiled now, that white plays f4. Okay, so where can the queen go usefully? d4 is out of the question, goes back, and then we see e5, and all of a sudden d6 is really marked out by white in this position. It's a real weakness. So it seems to be some sort of opening disaster. Not only that, where is the knight going to go? This bishop is also stopping, well, if the knight goes back, then knight e4, and another piece is eyeing d6, and with tempo, So it looks fairly grim. So Tal has to play a concession here. He's got in trouble in the opening here. Black is already in quite serious trouble, and if he can't retreat the knight, I mean, this would just look quite horrendous actually. Knight ce4, and what happens now? Knight d6 is going to happen. The king's going to be dislodged. It's not going to be very nice at all. This sort of position. It looks resignable, in fact. So Tal decides to try in this position the move a6, and he's turning it into a pawn sacrifice position, into some sort of strange gambit with not too much compensation, because white can now take and win a pawn. What has black got for it? It's not much, really. He's going to try and regain the pawn with rook g8. Okay, so we see knight e4 attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back. Is Fischer going to let this pawn go lightly or not, or with a fight? Well, it turns out with a fight now. Queen d4 protecting the pawn, and also in this position knight f6 could be potentially very useful. A forcing move from black now, rook a4. Okay, now knight f6 is used. Bishop takes, queen takes. Can black get some counterplay going in this position? Well, black tries queen c7 in this position, at least trying to get the queen out. Maybe try and challenge the queen here. He's attacking c2 as well. So if taking on b5, then maybe there's rook b4. Okay, or something. No, if taking on b5, pardon me, that's not on. The king's still in the center. Just check. Pardon me. Just check. The pawn's not on here. But okay, the queen's come back into the action anyway. More into the action. Now white does castle here, so the pawn is on now. But so is a2. Now, is this really dangerous? To the king on the queen side doing this. Why can't white have castled king side, you might ask? If white castles king side, then possibly this sort of thing is quite dangerous. A check, and you can imagine something like b6, and this looks a little bit dangerous on this diagonal. So white's not too keen in this position. He's already got some weaknesses over here. He doesn't want to castle king side. He thinks it's safer maybe to castle queen side. Okay, but rook takes a2. Okay, Fischer just plays king b1, and we have a resourceful defensive opportunity here on this diagonal. But if something like queen a5, then possibly b3 is the right move, just to defend a1, and then this rook is kind of stuck on a2. Doesn't look too hot on a2. White can build up here the position, and is threatening, for example, bishop h5 anyway, to exterminate the black king. So okay, so let's go back. After king b1, rook a6 is chosen, which does offer at least e5 to try and eject the queen out of f6. Okay, but Fischer doesn't mind that. He plays bishop takes b5. We see rook b6, still reserving that possibility of e5 to eject the queen. The bishop goes back rather, and then we see this move e5, and it becomes quite a magical game from here on in, especially if you haven't seen this game before. What do you think Fischer played in this position if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? Anyone? Okay, Fischer played f takes e5, offering the queen here, believe it or not. So his idea is that this rook's also in trouble with bishop h7 coming soon. So after rook takes, e takes, it's difficult for black to stop bishop takes h7 in this particular position. Tal tries queen c5. Okay, and this is takes. So white's going to get back 2 rooks for the queen. That's good material. And now also f7 is dropping for g7. So bishop takes f7. In this position, okay, potentially white's also got these pawns to race down the board. Black tries here king d8. Now we see bishop e6, which introduces rook f7 to target d7. So black's on the back foot here, it seems, even though he's got the queen against the 2 rooks in this sort of position isn't too hot. And we're transitioning now into queen versus 2 rooks. And this is not good, even though you might think the queen could be handy here, but it's difficult for black to do anything. Fischer uses these checks, and now rook d1. Okay, and basically if queen takes, then rook h1, really dangerous for the rooks to make the king here. So the queen stays on that h file for the moment, and then we see rook b7, queen staying on the h file. Now g4, trying to get the queen away from that h file, so that rook h1, I believe, is strong. For example, it's going to be forcibly winning the queen here, surely, because if we try and defend here, well, there's always rook b8. So the queen stays on the h file, but this pawn is really dangerous. Queen f3. Okay, in this position the queen is attacking now the rook. Check, and the rook takes on b5, and the game continues a little bit actually, but ultimately it looks as though there isn't too many prospects for black. He's outgunned materially, and here actually, after rook a6, Tal decided to resign. He's faced with this pawn. There's no hope for him in this position, it seems. So that was actually Fischer's first victory against Mikhail Tal. So historically important. And Tal's only lost in this tournament. So in this tournament they were fiercely contesting with each other who was going to win the tournament. But now let's Tal described this as it's difficult to play against Einstein's theory, and the game is actually annotated in detail if you want to check out my channel on YouTube if you search Fischer versus Tal 1961. Okay, so let's have a look at another Tal game now with the black pieces. So we're looking at the black pieces, Bled 1961 tournament. Against some of the lower rated players in the tournament, Tal was particularly effective. Let's have a look at this game. So against Mario Berto. Okay, we see here the Benoni being used after e6, Nf3 c5. The Benoni is not too popular nowadays, but very dangerous weapon if white misplays it. Black's got a lot of play on the dark squares here in the Benoni, potentially, as well as a 3-2 pawn majority, which could be dangerous. These dark squares as well. So that's black's trump cards. Okay, so e4 d6, bishop e2, and it looks as though it's sensible for white to play bishop e2, and but now both sides castle. Rook e8. Okay, white sensibly defends. Knight a6. We see f3 reinforcing the centre, and is the knight going to torture this d6 pawn? Knight d7. Okay. Knight c4. Torturing the d6 pawn. Now knight e5 challenges that knight, of course. Bishop f4. Tal's not concerned too much about this position. He takes on c4 here, and now just plays knight c7. So he's covering against knight b5, which could further attack the pawn, and also potentially, you know, black might be interested in playing for b5 later, like this. We see queen d2 now, and a6. So black's trying to use this 3-2 pawn majority. If we can get this going, this will be potentially interesting for black to make use of. White clamps down on that with a4. Fair enough. We see rook b8. So no need, it seems, well, in Tal's treatment here, he doesn't feel the need to play b6, and you might think b6 would be useful because then a5 you can play b5, but actually you can play rook b8. It gives a slightly different flavour to the game. White tries to clamp down, but now black can accept some structural damage with b5, can accept this en passant and an isolated pawn in this particular position because he feels the dynamism is there. The rook is active and maybe coordinating with the bishop. So for this little bit of structural damage, it might be worth it sometimes to consider this approach. Peace pressure. We see now an awkward move tactically coming up, which is the move rook a5, which seems to have the intention of doubling here against maybe a6, but now rook b4 is played, and white actually plays a disastrous tactical move here, and it's so disastrous. It's white's last move. Can you spot white's last move in this game, which is a complete tactical disaster? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, white to play and lose. That's a big test for you. So what would be a terrible move to play, which might be feasible, you think? Anyone? Any ideas? White plays a really disastrous tactical move here. Not knight b5, no. Okay, I'm going to leave it. White plays rook a4, and can you see how black exploits this weakness of the last move? So this is the last move. How does Tal exploit this tactically? What move can he play here to win material? "20 seconds. Black to play and win." No? Okay, yep, you got it, yep, thank you. Okay, bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3. He's attacking the queen and there's no defense of a4 now. So what can white do? He's just losing a rook. If he plays on, he's just losing a rook. Bad blunder. Bad, bad, bad. He doesn't want to just lose a knight. He might as well give up if he moves the queen. So that game ended abruptly. Let's just check that out in overview and summary. Though the Benoni might be a good point scorer for us all. It's an underrated opening perhaps nowadays, and would have great surprise value nowadays, as a lot of people are playing the Slav or the Groomfield, trying to emulate the top grandmasters. But the Benoni as a fighting weapon seems to offer counterplay. White seemed to play all the right things to try and torture d6, to try and restrain this 3-2. So White was playing all the right things, it seemed, and blundered. And you might think, well, was it just a blunder, or did Black have a good position? If we go back to the scene of the blunder, well, b6 is a lot less active than rook b8 for a start. So with rook b8, the game's sharpened up with piece pressure to have to deal with on this b file, and rook b4 in particular to deal with. So okay, White had a reasonable position. Rook a5 probably a little bit pointless. Rook b4, if he had moved the bishop back, well, with the rook here there is an x-ray attack in any case, so maybe something like knight b5 or even knight takes d5 might be on the cards at some point. Not here, maybe, because this rook is also going to be attacked, but this rook, it's a tactical vulnerability. Say it just moved back sensibly, well then we lose the bishop. We've got to do something about the bishop. Right, so say bishop does move, okay, let's just move back the bishop. Then possibly a move like knight b5 hits a5 and threatens to play knight d4. So if we go with a rook move back, this excursion was bad. Get a knight on d4 and it's pretty nasty. It's not a pleasant position for White here, it seems, anyway. Okay, so there's a lot of threats to deal with. a6 seems insignificant. So anyway, White blundered badly, to be fair. Didn't need to terminate the game that quickly. But okay, let's check out another game. And Benoni used again in this tournament by Mikhail Tal against Germeck. So how did this go, this Benoni treatment? We see after e6, Benoni again, knight f3. Now in this game, White tries bishop g5. Is bishop g5 really a good idea? Well, okay, the follow-up here is e3, which means White's intention wasn't to try and exchange off dark square bishops, but rather maybe to just put the bishop round here to attack the d6 weakness. Tal decides he doesn't mind kicking the bishop here and kicking it again, and it eyes d6, sure, but there's the move knight h5 to try and just pick it off straight off the bat, take away this dark square bishop. Knight d2 attacks that knight, and maybe knight c4 is coming up. Black takes hg, and Tal's not afraid of castling kingside here. Even though White's got that h file, it's not really backed up by much. You might think the light squares are a bit drafty on the other hand, but okay, queen e7, and we see bishop d3, knight d7, and now White castles. Knight e5. I think Black's dark square campaign is going well here from this opening, and it looks as though after knight takes e5 we have quite a beautiful position here for Black on the dark squares, and these double pawns are not really helping White too much. Black's still got the 3-2 pawn majority asset, so this is like a dream Benoni position in some respects. Rook e1, and we see bishop d7, Okay, rook b1, and now, interestingly, perhaps, plays the move g4. He might have been concerned slightly, perhaps, by f4 as a possible option for white. So g4 allows for an en passant if needed. G takes f3 en passant. So knight e2, trying to make use of that f4 square, newly created weakness with g4. But now this 3-2, this pawn majority, is it really that dangerous? We talk about this 3-2 pawn majority in the Benoni, but is it really, really that dangerous? White tries to put the brakes on it with b3. Now we see this rook fc8, so a threat on the horizon of creating potentially a dangerous passed pawn, maybe. Knight f4, and now c4. So a dangerous passed pawn, or is it? With bishop c2, well, that's a useful blockade for that pawn. What else is there about this pawn on c4? Well, defensively it's stopping this sort of nonsense. It's keeping the queen out of d3. Can black also make use of the b file? Is he worried about anything? Queen's also preventing knight h5 here. So black's got a lot of pressure on the dark squares, but it's unclear what the role is of this passed pawn right now. He plays rook ab8. And we see in this position queen e2, which now seems to have the threat of rook takes and then queen takes c4. Okay, but queen c3 looks like a nasty entrance on that dark square. What is black now threatening? And you might think, well, hold on, the queen leaving here, maybe there's something like knight h5. Is that on the cards? Or is there something up with this? Okay, the queen is x-rayed with rook ec1, as though check is now threatened to win the queen with rook takes c3 next. So the queen actually, her intention is made known now. Actually, in this position, a feature not yet noted was this a2 pawn, and we see now queen a3. But the pawn is immune at the moment because there's still bishop h2 like this. So what is the idea? Is it maybe, okay, something even more interesting? After king h2 we see a5, and one idea now emerges that actually black wants to play rook b4 and put a lot more pressure on white, just simply on the dark squares, intensifying the dark square pressure. White plays rook d1, so white's got a passive position. And now we see rook b4. Okay. Now in this position, white goes a bit crazy with a piece sacrifice. White plays actually the move knight e6, believe it or not, with seemingly nebulous compensation. Before we get into that, what would you say black is threatening here? What is black's actual plan in this position? Is it simply to just double rooks? That seems the simplest, maybe. If black can double rooks, if the rook goes off, then there's rook b2, and if there's rook b2, then there's maybe queen a2 next. So maybe that's simply it, that rook b4, the a5 and rook b4 has enabled doubling rooks on the b file for a rook infiltration to b2, which would be very unpleasant. Say white didn't do anything. Well, say white took on b4, maybe we don't want to necessarily take with the queen here. If we take with the pawn, then potentially, well, these pawns are looking menace with just b3 here. So it looks as though if we have this sort of continuation, it's going to be downhill for white without much of a fight. Okay, so maybe this helps explain why white's slightly concerned here and plays this seemingly desperate piece sack. So it's accepted. Okay, one pawn for it, queen takes g4. There is a pin on the bishop, okay, and there's a potential for queen g6 to try and get onto the light squares maybe. Tal doesn't mind, he plays rook e8, and here really queen g6 isn't backed up though, is it? If queen g6, then maybe just king f8 in this position. Let's see, queen g6, or maybe even something else. It doesn't look as though this should be a major attack going on. Maybe black can just close up with e5 even. It doesn't look as though that's a dreadful position. So the piece sack doesn't seem too convincing right now. White tries bishop g6. After rook e7, queen h4, bishop f8. Also, there's a slight problem now of c3 attacking the queen, and that's not very nice either. Rook g7 as well coming up. White decides actually on second thoughts this piece sacrifice is just nonsense. Can he not get the rook in though? In this position, after bishop f8, he resigned actually. You might think, well, couldn't white try at least rook d4? Let's see, can we refute rook d4 here? Possibly just c3, in fact. c3 is maybe good enough. Or is it? Rook takes, this could be dangerous. Rook g4, that could be dangerous. So perhaps not. What about just e5 in this position? That would cover the g4 square. So maybe this is good enough. Okay, so here anyway, white resigned. It wasn't too much. Rook takes b1's we mentioned as well. That inviting rook g4 could be dangerous. But maybe you're right. You know, maybe this sort of position. I don't know. I don't think it's needed to go in for this because white might be threatening check now. I don't think it's needed. I think just e5 might be safe. White's already a piece down. Okay, so let's go on to another game. These were a bit lower rated players in this tournament. They didn't offer much of a fight, but let's go on to the game against Udovich. So against Mikhail Udovich, let's see, Tal with the black pieces. We see, instead of d5, we see knight f3 being played. So no Benoni in this game. C takes, knight takes, e6. Okay, so it looks like an interesting variation of the English opening. Bishop b4, threatening maybe some structural damage. That's actually protected with just bishop d2 protecting that. Knight c6. White plays e3. So white's position seems okay at the moment. Black castles, bishop e2. And now d5, energetic play in the centre. Not minding an isolated queen's pawn. So we see c takes, e takes. The bishop's been a bit liberated though. Black can look forward to using that e4 square on the semi-open file. We see knight takes c6. White doesn't mind leaving this structure instead of the isolated queen pawn. Maybe he's looking at the dark squares. Is he trying to exploit the dark squares, or the c5 square in particular? We see with rook c1 that now there is at least a concrete plan, maybe to try and eye c5. Queen e7, bishop f3. So white's position here looks quite solid. He plays g3, and we see rook ac8, rook e1. It's a bit passive though. You could say white's position looks a little bit passive. a3, as though he's interested in marking out that c5 square though. Queen d7, b4. Okay, so faced with some annoyance on the queen side, especially with the c5 square, Tal plays a typical Tal move, attacking move here. He plays actually the move h5, and you might wonder, well, if this is taken, you might wonder, is there a clear-cut idea of just taking? But maybe the idea is simply g6. The bishop moves back and then just king g7, and we've got a ready-made attack. That could be an idea anyway. The pawn isn't taken. Instead, knight e2, h4, softening a little bit black's king. At the moment it seems fairly solid, but okay, bishop e4. And now Tal's bringing his rook round, switching his rook round, made to look easy, this attack at the moment. hg, softening the white king a little bit. fg, which often weakens the diagonal. If you're playing a move like f4 or fg, you're weakening that diagonal. And here, an interesting response is made to this. The move c5, as though this diagonal is being emphasized, we see after b takes, bishop takes. So potentially here, bishop takes d4 could be useful as a forcing move as well. e3 pawn looks a little bit sickly. Okay, queen a6, and the rook comes back now. Bishop e2. And now threatening mate on the spot, queen h3, threatening mate. That's parried, but the queen now parks on h5. So it looks like these bishops are really pointing at white's king in Tal manner. And okay, is there a downside to this? Can white defend or try to defend? He plays queen e2, but we see queen h6. Okay, a4, and now queen g6, putting pressure on g3, and it looks as though a potential threat might even be knight h5 takes g3 here. Potentially this pawn chain here doesn't look as safe as before. Bishop h3 attacking the rook, but we see bishop d3, queen moves, the rook moves, queen f4. Okay, now here a forcing move, queen h5, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back. You might think, well, hold on, what about this rook? Why didn't the rook move? You know, what if queen takes here? Is that too dangerous? Well, queen takes implies actually knight g4 might be on the card, so h2 could be a big problem. So that looks particularly dangerous actually for defending. So maybe that was why that was rejected. We see instead bishop g2. Okay, and the rook now moves. So is white getting out of any trouble? He plays h3. There still leaves this question of this e4 square and the backward pawn though. Knight e4 looks pretty nasty for white, even if nothing immediate springs to mind. g4 attacking the queen, goes back to g6. Bishop e1 attacking the bishop. And now this is a little bit, you might think this is a little bit odd that the queen, which was seemingly probing for weaknesses on the king side, switches to a6 to protect that bishop here. Okay, bishop h4. Now bishop takes d4. Okay, he takes. Now knight c3. And here, with the threat of knight e2 check, black is actually winning the exchange all of a sudden. Okay, but can white at least get a pawn for the exchange? So somehow he's blundered to be potentially the exchange down now. He sacks the exchange here for that d5 pawn. And the queen goes back to g6 now. Bishop e1. And the rook comes to the 7th rank. Bishop g3. We see bishop e4 now, eyeing that g2. It's not particularly great for white, being the exchange down here. And the two rooks are joining on that 7th rank. But what about this d pawn? Is that dangerous? It takes a long time though to do something with it. d5. Rook ed2. d6. Queen f6, not minding the queens coming off. Check. Check. Queen g6. Queen f3. Okay, a neat little forcing move is played in this position. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 20 seconds here. So black to play a neat forcing move in this position. So what would you play here if you were black? Anyone? No, queen d3 just loses, doesn't it? Queen d3, someone's mentioned on the stream, you just take, and you lose the rook. Not queen d3. No, I'll show you. Oh, someone's mentioned it. Okay. The move rook c3 is nice, trying to deflect the queen away from defending d1. Queen takes c3, takes, and it's simpler now with this rook behind the passed pawn. Queen e4. Okay, what are the menacing threats? Maybe it's just an exchange of queens. After queen e3, queen c2 check. Now white seems to be losing his queen. If king f3, then rook d3, queen e2, then rook d2. So here white resigns actually. Okay, a neat little game there. We could do a quick overview and summary. So what on earth happened there to cause white's downfall? I think basically, if we look at the play of white, it seems a bit passive, as though white's kind of scared of Tal, and the queenside play, you know, in theory it's going to be nice to get to use c5. In practice, with h5 it starts to look scary to indulge this c5 square here. So the knight actually goes for defensive duties instead. So the whole c5 thing is lacking bites now. The knight coming to d4 you would think is quite good, but we see some structural damage really with fg instead of hg. That pawn is a bit horrible. If white had played hg instead, then this crudity rook g3 is looking horrible for that g3 pawn. And there's no defensive resource, you know, f2 is blocking in the queen, queen h3 coming in. Could be pretty nasty pretty quickly here. Get nasty quickly. So we see fg instead, at least the queen is able to kind of defend, but it's not too nice for that e4 square. And still white has some issues around the king side to deal with. Okay, so the rook attack just ignored here, trying to nab this bishop. It goes back. Now knight e4, which carries with it bishop d6 actually to try and win g3. So g4 gets out of the way of that. But again, bishop d6 is still nasty for the dark squares in general. Bishop e1. Okay, and the queen goes for a moment to protect that. And also, potentially bishop e2 is on the cards, and you can imagine bishop d6 here with that bishop there is pretty nasty in some cases. So we see bishop h4, and now just bishop takes d4 is a forcing move idea. You might think in this position, why not rook takes c8? I think here this is nasty. Queen takes c8, queen come around like this, check, and that's pretty nasty. If e takes here, maybe queen c2 is pretty nasty. Okay, so white plays like this. He's losing the exchange for not much after knight c3. This knight e2 is going to fork king and queen. So winning the exchange. The rest is not too hard, surely. Tell the exchange up. It gets rid of the light square bishops, but he leaves this seemingly dangerous passed pawn, but he deals with that next. And there's this nice move coming up. Very useful here. Rook c3 to help deal with this passed pawn. Forcing moves come to the rescue. Here's the exchange up anyway. And now he's forcibly winning the queen. Okay. Right. I think I'm still a bit hungover, I think, from last night. I hope you've had a good new year, and hope you all the best for your chess in this new year. And okay, maybe see you next week. I hope you enjoyed this week. Okay, thanks very much. See you all next week.